If you are a business owner about to embark on a AI implementation journey, let me save you 5 to 10 grand by sharing a checklist of things that you have to take care of before you start on a project. Because otherwise, I've seen this over the past 3 years as an AI automation engineer, that projects usually fail if one or more of these issues are present in the strategy. So let's get started with that. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to use two examples to illustrate the common pitfalls, the must-haves, and also later we'll walk through what exactly you should be looking to automate, and also, how to have a little audit inside your company so that you can find the things that are most valuable for automating. All right, so let me go over here. And so I have a positive example, which is a sales automation. And let me just show you what that looks like. Now, I know this is a lot of code, it might look a little scary, but to be honest, it's nothing that crazy that's going on. It's just a bunch of steps. It's just plumbing, to be honest. You have one step where you're filtering out, leads or you're filtering out the leads you're adding with the leads that already exist in your system. Another step where you're extracting company domains, so on and so on. And it's nothing that dissimilar from, an N10 workflow, which you guys might be more familiar with. If you're not, then this is essentially a platform where it allows you to do sort of a low code, no code type of automations. But the overall, what do I call it? Fundamental or the principle is the same in both places. So we can utilize utilize both of them to understand the checklist better. All right, so let's look at the sales automation. So if I go over here with the sales automation, now a common pitfall that we have is trying to do too much at once. So what happens here is, like, many times we would want to, before value is demonstrated in a single piece, we would want to automate the entire process, right? And it sort of applies here as well, where we try to have this end-to-end mindset when we go about this, that okay, we're going to take this entire piece and we're going to automate it. But the thing is, many times, we don't know which part is going to break. So before we get started, it's very hard to know which of these pieces is going to be feasible or not feasible. Now, over time, obviously, if you're speaking with someone more experienced, they can tell you that, okay, this piece is feasible, this piece is not going to do so well. But if you're the one hiring an engineer, they're going to say, yes, it's feasible, let's do it. But as the business owner, it's your job to, think through these and be like, okay, is this valuable? Is this feasible? And should I go after it? So these 2 points, if I talk about it in terms of this automation, what we did here was to go step by step. And this is, especially applicable in situations where you have a very well-defined workflow. So, each step over here, I can very easily tell you how much time we saved, right? So it was about, initially, it was about 4 hours that were spent on something like this. And that was not 4 hours a week, that was 4 hours a day, cleaning a list of over 600 to 700 leads that were being imported into a email outreach system. Now, if I take a look at the first piece over here, this piece itself was saving about 15-20 minutes of work. If I combine a few more of these steps, we're up to about 45 minutes of work. And we added these steps all step by step. So once we saw that this is working, we replaced the existing piece, the existing thing that was being done in the workflow with this piece over here. Come here, upload your Excel sheet, and you're going to maybe spend a few minutes on the processing and then download it right back and then just do everything else that you would do regularly. That was the instruction to the employees. Next thing, again, just step by step after step. And over time, what happened was they just had fewer and fewer of those, steps to do. And what we did was, okay, now instead of downloading it in the middle, now there's two steps. So now when you're downloading the Excel sheet, it's, even more ready for you to do the rest of the things as you wish. And the good thing about doing it this way is you actually get to test and stress test each of the steps. Because what happens is, and what can happen is, if you build the entire thing out at once, if something breaks, you have no idea why something is breaking, especially in a process where sales is related. If you start suddenly losing leads and you figure out that, hey, like I was doing it when I was doing it manually, everything was working, but suddenly I go the automated route, now things aren't working. And you've built out this massive automation. There's no idea which of the steps is breaking down, which of the things is why the entire process is sort of not working. Now, if I look at it for this blog post generation workflow, if I try to go over here, so in this situation, what I did wrong in the implementation is that I tried to do both the blog post content generation piece and the client follow up piece that we built for these people. So what happened there is essentially we're generating some content and we're getting it approved, right? Should be simple, should be simple, but there's a lot of little nuances, little pieces, little edge cases that you have to take care of. And it is very easy to underestimate the difficulty that there will be in automating an entire process. So what we did incorrectly was first we should have tested out the process that is related to the blog post creation thoroughly. Let that be replaced. Like take time. It's okay. It's like it doesn't have to be done in a week, 2 weeks. If it takes a month where you're giving it to your employees to test it out and they're giving you feedback, you're incorporating the feedback, and you're just doing that cycle over and over again. If you perfect that piece, now that is genuine ROI that you have generated from that, rather than going after the entire piece altogether. So let's go back. Okay, end to end versus low hanging fruit. So, again, there's no point to build everything all at once. It's just much, much better to figure out what is highest ROI and lowest difficulty. Like, if you can find that piece that gives you the highest ROI and is the easiest, quickest thing to build, also is actually feasible with the technology where it's at right now. Those are the three things to really look for. If I go to misallocating time, very simple. It's about figuring out what is going to be A, the breaking point, and B, the value in the entire process. So if I take the example of this blog post creation, right? Is the value in getting it approved from the client, or is the value in creating a very, very, very rock solid blog post that is being enriched by a lot of different workflows? You have YouTube, you have, uh, Google research, you have your brief that you have written up. All of these things contribute to creating a really solid product versus the process which is related to getting, the blog post approved by the client and going through a few different, editing steps there. The answer is obvious, right? It's the actual content that you're creating where the time should be allocated the most. But what happens is time spent and difficulty is not always correlated to what is the highest ROI activity. So let's go down, error handling. So the more complex something becomes, the more prone it becomes to errors. And also, if each piece is not built in a modular manner, then what happens is you have higher chances of errors just propagating along the pipeline. Okay, observability and monitoring, this is something which needs to be built in because there has to be an easy way of seeing a report where, you know, I'm having issues, those issues should be visible either through Notion table, either through an Airtable, and there should be an automation that essentially just creates a report out of that and sends it out weekly to you. Because if only the engineers are seeing this, then it can get a little skewed, and it might not be in their best interest to fix it, because I don't know, maybe it's not worth it in terms of the amount of time it might take, or they think it's too little of an issue, but you might not be seeing it. So it's very important to not have the automations you built be a black box. Somebody should be able to see it. Okay, employee adoption. So if I bring this down over here, employee adoption in this workflow was actually very solid. But the issue that happened was initially there was pushback. And the reason there was because the employees weren't involved in the process of creating this. It's like when you're involved, even if you ask a few questions, even if you ask like for objections for doing the automation from your employees, and even something like that, if there's back and forth, suddenly the adoption and the buy-in that the employees have gets much, much greater. For example, in the sales automation example, what we did was we went step by step, and B, we incorporated the end user who was going to use this from the very first step, and we actually had him drive the uh, the requirements for the project. Now, you don't always want to let the employees drive that because they might not think from a business perspective. And actually, that is somewhat of an issue that we faced in this example, where the employee wanted content, the employee wanted the approval part of the thing to be focused upon and improved and made perfect. But from a business side of things, it was the blog post generation which was the highest quality, highest ROI activity. So this can go both ways. So it's very important to make sure that you as the business owner control um, how this goes, but you also include the employees so that they feel like they have a say in things. And also we don't want them to feel afraid of using these things, right? We're not trying to replace their job, we're trying to help them do more of it, because everybody else is going to be doing this, right? Everybody else is going to be incorporating agents now. If you're producing 5 units, somebody else is producing 50 units. It's very hard to compete in that market. Okay, so let's go down here. Delaying and user involvement, same thing, just covered that. Not doing the math. So what I mean by this is it's very important to do the math on how many units you're actually going to be running through the pipeline. So how much flow is actually going to be going through the pipeline? Because if there isn't enough flow going through it, there's no point of making the automation. In this example, what happened is like we have 600 leads that need to be generated every or cleaned, enriched every day. And if that is the case, then you have definite flow going through the system. It's a very time consuming process, and you can very easily do the math on this and allocate a number to it. Now, in this example, the blog post creation and the generation part, definitely very high ROI, because it is something which takes the content creators hours to do. Like if you're doing a very high quality blog, initially it would be taking a lot of hours to do something like that. But with the content generation, given a brief and given some directions on how we would scrape and how we would enrich the data, this process turned that into 10-15 minutes maximum, including all the regeneration, including all the feedback, comments, all those things. But the approval process, this wasn't as important because it didn't take that long to do manually. And there weren't enough, what do I say? There wasn't enough flow through that. So it wasn't like you were doing hundreds of these in a day. right? Then it makes sense. But there are maybe, I guess, like 5, 10, I think, 10 or 15 going through this. And it just didn't make sense to automate that side of things. Okay, estimating the difficulty again, like very easy to underestimate difficulty. And this is something where it's hard if you haven't had experience doing this to estimate how difficult something's going to be. And many times, especially in AI automation, what I've realized is like the difficulty isn't in creating the flow. So like creating this workflow over here is not that it's difficult, but it's not rocket science. It's more plumbing actually. The difficulty comes from making it work for you. The difficulty comes from making it actually produce business output. And if I think about it, right, one of the things where this broke down actually, and it took some time to fix, was that formatting outputs from ChatGPT or Claude into Google Docs or into a report is actually very, very difficult. Especially Google Docs because they have their own API, they have their own way of doing these things. And it's just one of those unexpected things where you might plan for the project to be done, you know, in 30 hours, say, but it might take you another 20 hours just to fix formatting issues, all these things. And like I understand as I'm thinking about this, it is a little hard for you to estimate this yourself. So what I'll try to do is I'll try to make a video on this and see if I can go through the different places where I have experienced these difficulties so that you don't have to face them. Formatting right off the bat is difficult and it's something to really watch out for. In your case, if you're using some tools, it might not be that big of a problem, especially HTML or Markdown. That's super, super easy to get generated. But if you want to use some, third-party things like Notion, or if you're going to use Google Docs, very, very hard to get it exactly right. Okay. So now let's go over to the things that are must-haves. So if I go over here, self-learning must-have because data is a moat, right? At the end of the day, the reason why you get paid more, the reason why I get paid more than somebody who's starting out is because we have built experience, we've built knowledge, we understand these pitfalls, must haves, all of these things that give us a more leverage on our time. And the same thing has to be true of the agents that you build. You really have to look at them as employees. So, if we're talking about the sales automation, the personalization that we did here, that was self-learning. Because just like an employee that would start out, what we did was we initially, obviously, we gave it examples, right? That this is how you need to do it. But then we also had it create these personalizations, and then we would, based on the output, we would select a personalization and we would maybe tweak it a little bit. Now, there has to be a way of capturing that. So we made it so that in Notion, there's whenever the update is made, it's very hard to actually get people to leave feedback. So like very hard to get employees to leave feedback on the output. It's much, much easier to just decipher from the actual output they chose and the actual output they used to figure out what went wrong or what went right. And then you obviously try to reward what went right, and you obviously try to figure out what was wrong in the outputs which weren't chosen. And then that process has to be automated. That's reinforcement learning with human feedback. That's very, very important so that your agents will actually be getting better over time rather than staying stagnant and need to be improved only through the use of prompts. Okay, so let's keep going. Dynamic knowledge base. This is very, very important because what will happen is, and especially this is used for like knowledge retrieval type of things, chatbot type of things, where the information that you have gets outdated. You might want to fix something, you might want to improve something, and it shouldn't be that you have to go back to the developer to make a small little update to something, right? That should not be the case. But going back to misallocating time and lower hanging fruit, this should be done later on. Once you have proven, once you've proven that, let's say, once you have done all of these things, once you have avoided all of these things, once you have proven ROI, only then you should be doing something like this, which is an additional step that needs to be built in. Okay, so user testing, feedback, super important. And you have to make it really, really convenient for them to give feedback. As I mentioned, in self-learning, it should probably ideally just be, okay, this is the actual output I'm going to send, and it's in the Notion captured so that when the agent goes through and has a learning iteration, that it loops through all of the outputs that were there. Now it is going to pick that up and realize, okay, this is the improvement. This was the output chosen. This was the output I generated. What was the improvement, and how can I collect all of that and utilize that the next time? Okay. So all of the modules need to be swappable and upgradable. And what I mean by this is, like, say for example, inside here, any of these modules don't really depend on, or sorry, they do depend on each other, but they have a protocol. So as long as it gets out the input in that protocol, this can more or less be a black box, right? This can more or less be a black box. Input can flow in here and flow out of here. And as long as we know, as long as it comes in a certain format, it will leave in that format, regardless of what happens here. So what happens then is you can very easily just get rid of this, replace it with something else, and as long as it has that same protocol of having inputs in a certain way and outputs in a certain way, you can completely replace this step with something else, right? For example, here we're removing unverified emails, right? Say, for example, I want to replace the API now because my API is down. Maybe the one I was using was Zoom Info's, I think, bounds verifier or something like that. And if that goes down, you want to go to million verifier. Now that should be a very easy step. It shouldn't break anything, down in the rest of the workflow. Okay. Speed, again, if you build modular pieces, if you build the lowest hanging fruit first, if you build pieces step by step, as they demonstrate ROI, you should have greater speed, and the time to production should be very, very low. You know, ideally, like under 30 hours of work, I would say, is probably where you should really be able to see some demonstrable ROI for you to then say, okay, I'm going to invest more into, really building this out. Okay, identifying breakpoints and feasibility assumptions. Now, again, this is it's very, very important to figure out where this thing will break, right? For example, if you're talking about blog post creation, if you go about creating all the infrastructure stuff and you don't test whether or not you can generate a single good output, if you haven't fine-tuned your prompt, that is where this is going to break, right? The blog post creation breaks if your prompt isn't solid. If you can't find a way of creating a really solid blog post from that prompt. Now the rest of the stuff that's over here, where you're running it through a few AI agents, you're storing it, cleaning it, and so on. All of that is plumbing. Like that's not where the value is generated. So the place where the value is generated needs to be created first. That's what needs to be prioritized. Okay, working SOP. Now here in the sales automation piece, you guys are probably doing the same steps over and over and over and over and over again in your sales process, right? There's many other SOPs that are built the same way, that anybody can just come in, they can be replaced, and like they can be dropped in within a week or so, they know how this process is supposed to be done, and they can do it very easily, right? That same feature or that same aspect, if we can have that where it's as a workflow, it doesn't change too much, it's very, very well defined. It's already been created, right? Rather than having to work with something which you're going to create from scratch. It's way better to have the working SOP that the human is doing and then go to a automation rather than trying to do both the creation of the SOP, so the creation of the actual steps and the workflows that need to be executed, and doing it using AI at the same time is something that I've seen fail numerous times in the past. Where it's much better to pick something that's already working and then try to use AI to reduce the effort into it. Okay, cool. So what should you be automating? Now, here are the major categories of things that you can be looking to automate. And you know, when you work through each of these categories, you should have something like this. Doesn't have to be like this. This is a little bit fancy. It wasn't that hard to create for me, but it was for a law firm. They wanted to do a audit throughout their processes and figure out what the time versus complexity um, metric is for the things that they do. And you can very easily create this in Excel sheet. All you need is from your employees, just get all the different tasks that they do. So in a law firm, they have email correspondence, which I'm sure you guys are going to have yourself, billing, invoices, all these different things. And you allocate, okay, this is how much time it takes in a day, this is how hard it is, and then you just divide it and you say, okay, now once I get an idea of how much time it takes divided by the complexity of the task, now I can sort it and just go through, okay, the most time saved, the least complex, and there it is. Just sort that and then just start at the top of the list and just go down in terms of what needs to be automated. Okay. So these are the places to look. So if you have workflows, SOPs, as I said, in sales, marketing, and even in fulfillment, where you have certain pieces of your work that is like, if you're a property manager and you have tenant audits that you do, or tenant approval screening processes, and that's super, super manual, then there's a lot of scope there to automate those. Interactions. So interactions are where you have support, or somebody is on your website and there's a chat bot, whatever it is. This is another place where it can be automated. However, you have to really care or take care here, because what can happen is, if you're not having enough flow through the system, like if you don't do the math, there's a very high likelihood that you don't have that many interactions coming in. And you might be thinking, okay, I'm going to get more in the future and I'm going to be scaling, so I should build this out. But I've realized that usually it's better to focus on the thing where you're already experiencing pain, rather than rather than planning ahead when it comes to building out automations and workflows like this. It's usually better to, I think Hormozy has a saying. What is it? It's remove, automate, delegate, or to remove, delegate, automate, something like that. And usually, in my experience, it is better to just experience the pain and then see if you can do it quicker using a human. If you can't do it, then you go ahead and try to automate that process. Okay. Content creation, obviously, where we're at right now in the industry, in my opinion, is you can create very solid idea. You can generate very, very solid ideas, especially if you have a idea bank, and if you have if you're collecting data, if you have a moat, so if you have a self-learning aspect, if you have a knowledge base that you're growing, this can get really, really solid, because you will have collected all of the improvements that need to be made, right? You in if you say, for example, if you're creating a hook, right? if you have a collection of all the hooks that you have said work, and you have context behind it, okay, this is the type of project that it was. Now you can have that be referenced in the future hook generations that are going to be happening. So over time, that becomes more and more exponential, and your moat grows, and it becomes easier and faster for you to do. Okay, knowledge retrieval. This is sort of related to interactions, except interactions are usually don't require that much information. They aren't trained on tens of thousands of pages of documents. Usually, there are going to be, like, if somebody calls in, like it's a voice AI receptionist. It has a few well-defined tasks that it can do. Same with like a chatbot. You are giving some information out, yes, but it's not like you're giving your entire company's uh, documentation, SOPs, guides, all of that stuff out there. So this is really where, if say you're a manufacturing company or a real estate property management company, and you have certain protocols, policies, this is where and your employees have to regularly look at those policies. Again, do the math, um, ask your employees, and really try to figure out if how often they're digging through these things. And usually you'll know the pain, because many times if you ask some of their managers, they'll tell you, okay, I'm actually spending X amount of hours answering employee questions on a specific type of policy. Like if I have a fee structure, if I have like a lot of HOA fees, and say I have like 100 different properties that I manage, and I have 100 different HOA fees that I need to keep track of, and keep track of the compliance and all of these things. Now it becomes very, very useful, because the complexity of search is very, very high in that, and I have to do it regularly. So that is a task which is definitely worth automating. Summarizing and intelligence reporting. So this is where, you know, if you have a process for gathering market intelligence to understand what's happening in the market, what's your customers are doing, or if you want to generate intelligence on the things that you are doing. So, for example, if you're selling ads, right, um, or if you're a marketing agency, having a automated insights or summary process is very useful, because again, as you collect more and more of these summaries, you can have that be as data in your warehouse for for future reference, for future questions, for future interactions. And you can very easily use that for future content creation, and you can also use that for just for building your judgment, and improving your judgment on what's working right now, and what's worked in the past, and how can I use those two things simultaneously to help. Okay, so this was a little bit of a long video. I appreciate you sticking out, but hopefully, if you utilize this checklist of things, you can save yourself a lot of time, frustration, and money when you go about implementing AI in your company. Thank you so much. And if you're interested in reaching out to us, and having a quick call on what um, processes that you're running will be the most ripe for AI automation and give you the highest ROI, feel free to book a call through one of the links that are going to be in the description. But thank you so much, and enjoy your day. Bye bye.